Welcome back, everybody. We're ready to jump into another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at a story full of crazy twists, betrayals, and ultimately, forgiveness. We're in Genesis 45 today, using the NKJV translation. Expert, are you ready?
Absolutely. Genesis 45 is a powerful chapter. It really makes you think.
Yeah. You know, we're zeroing in on the moment Joseph reveals himself to those brothers who, let's face it, did him dirty.
It's such a pivotal moment in the story. It forces us to consider, how people handle trauma, injustice. Think about it. Joseph's own brothers sold him into slavery.
I know. Talk about
Right.
family drama. But here's the thing. He ends up in a position of power in Egypt. So what does he do? He doesn't plot revenge. He chooses forgiveness. What are your thoughts on that, expert?
Yeah.
Especially knowing the historical context here.
Well, you don't really see this kind of response too often in similar historical accounts from that era. Revenge was expected culturally. It was a way to, restore honor. Joseph really goes against the grain there.
Yeah, he totally does. And it's interesting how the text describes, the raw emotion when he reveals himself. He wept aloud, loud enough that even, the Egyptians in Pharaoh's household heard him. It's a pretty big deal, don't you think?
It's huge, yeah. It suggests that emotional expression maybe wasn't so taboo in Egyptian society. We actually get a glimpse, I think, into how complex their culture really was.
It makes you wonder, what were those Egyptians thinking? What were their ideas about family? Forgiveness?
Right, that's a great question, because you realize this isn't just some personal family drama. It's happening on a much bigger stage. Political, social. Who knows what the ripples were?
Okay, let's talk about Joseph's forgiveness. He says something really powerful to his brothers. He says, "It was not you who sent me here, but God." That's a loaded statement.
Hmm?
What do you think he means by that?
I think for Joseph, he's reframing everything, his whole experience. He's not a victim in his own story. He sees his journey as part of God's plan. That theological perspective, I think, allows him to move on past the anger, the resentment.
I can see that. But some people might say he's being naive, letting his brothers off the hook too easily. What do you think about that perspective?
It's complicated. On the one hand, you can't deny what his brothers did. It was awful. But Joseph forgiving them doesn't erase their actions. It's more about him and his own path forward. So he doesn't get stuck, consumed by bitterness.
Yeah, this idea of finding meaning in hardship, it's something we can all relate to, even today. How can we apply that to our own lives? What do you think?
I think Joseph's story challenges us to look for the bigger picture, even when things are really tough.
All right, so the big reveal's over, forgiveness offered. What happens next?
Well, we see this beautiful reunion, Joseph and his brothers, especially Benjamin, his younger brother.
So much emotion there.
Absolutely. It's a powerful depiction of family love, that connection. It goes beyond the years, the separation, the pain.
And then, of course, there's the practical side. Joseph tells his family, "Come to Egypt, live here, I'll take care of you during this famine." It's a huge decision, uprooting their whole lives, moving to a foreign land.
Big risks, big rewards, stepping into the unknown, but also a chance for a better life. It's a lot to process.
And then even Pharaoh gets involved. He offers wagons, provisions for the journey. That's surprising, given what we know about those times. Was Pharaoh, known for being generous?
It's possible Pharaoh saw this as a chance to secure Joseph's loyalty, especially with the famine going on. Someone as skilled as Joseph, during a crisis, he'd be invaluable.
So interesting to think about. It's Joseph's not just a family man. He's a high-ranking official in a powerful empire. What a story.
And you have to think about the cultural differences. For Jacob and his family, they were shepherds, a nomadic life. Egypt, that settled, agrarian, big adjustment.
Huge. Totally different world. Not just the physical environment, the whole social structure. Imagine, going from shepherd life in Canaan to, court life in Egypt.
Exactly. And let's not forget, this is emotional too. Jacob thought Joseph was dead for years, and now he's not only alive, but he's in this land of power and wealth, inviting them all to join him. Wow.
Okay, let's talk about Jacob's reaction when his sons come back and tell him Joseph's alive. It says, Jacob's heart stood still.
That's intense.
It really is. That phrase has fascinated, biblical scholars forever. Some say it was literal, like a physical reaction, the shock. Others think it's more metaphorical, like emotional paralysis. He can't even process it.
Either way, Jacob is struggling. Big time. Disbelief, joy, maybe even a little fear. I can't even imagine.
Absolutely. And not until he sees the evidence, the carts, the ones Joseph sent, that's when his spirit, revives.
It's like he needs that physical proof, the Egyptian wagons, the provisions. then it's real.
They're a symbol of
Yeah.
hope, proof that Joseph is okay, successful. It represents a future, not just survival, maybe even thriving. Then we get to Jacob's statement. Super moving. It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. All those years, the grief, just gone in that moment.
So powerful.
Yeah.
Right? It shows you hope never dies. And the father-son bond, unbreakable. Even after such suffering, he finds joy. It's incredible.
And it's not just about Jacob seeing Joseph again. This is a turning point for the whole family. Genesis 46 describes this epic caravan. Jacob, sons, families, livestock, everything. It's a whole community on the move.
And think about it. It's not just physical, it's symbolic. They're leaving Canaan, land of their ancestors, to start a new chapter in a foreign land.
Egypt, back then, power and wealth, total opposite of their shepherd life.
Absolutely. And you can sense Jacob's apprehension. God gives him a vision, reassures him, confirms his purpose. It's like God sees his fear and says, I'm with you, you've got this. Gives him strength.
But divine reassurance is key. This journey, it's not just a family reunion, it's God's plan.
Right. And it's more than just words. God promises, your descendants will become a great nation in Egypt, and I will bring them back to Canaan. It's a promise of hope in the midst of all this uncertainty.
So we've got this huge migration, guided by God, and at the heart of it all, this deep desire for reunion. After all these years, Jacob is finally going to see Joseph.
And that reunion, Genesis 46, it's just so emotional. It says, Joseph made ready his chariot, went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel, presented himself to him, fell on his neck, wept on his neck a good while. Years of longing, grief, all released.
You don't just hug, it says he wept on his neck a good while. That's powerful, deep connection, a true reconciliation.
It's timeless, universal, the parent-child bond, the healing power of forgiveness.
And this isn't just about Joseph and Jacob. It's the whole family. Joseph presents everyone to Pharaoh, father, brothers, their households. Now they're part of Egyptian society.
It's significant in so many ways. Shows Joseph's influence, Pharaoh's favor, and God's provision. He orchestrated this, put Joseph in a place to care for his family during this crisis. Amazing.
Betrayal, forgiveness, the journey, divine guidance, it all leads to this moment. Jacob and his family, standing before Pharaoh, ready for a new chapter. So we're picking up with Jacob and his family standing before Pharaoh. New chapter in their lives. It's kind of wild to think about this nomadic family from Canaan in the heart of Egypt. What were some of the challenges they faced adapting to this new life?
Well, you got to think about the culture shock. Huge. They were shepherds, open spaces, used to a certain, independence. Egypt was all about structure, hierarchy, centralized authority. Big change.
And don't forget, the famine's raging on. How does that impact their experience, especially with Joseph, their own brother, in charge of the grain?
Joseph's position, it's life or death for them. He's not just family, he's a powerful official. In the Egyptian government, unique dynamic there.
It says Joseph settled his family in Goshen. What can you tell us about Goshen? Was there a reason he chose that spot?
Good question. Goshen. It was in the Nile Delta. Fertile, good for grazing. So Jacob's family, they could keep that shepherd lifestyle and still be close to, the center of power. Smart move.
So it wasn't just about finding a home. It was about holding on to their identity, their way of life, even in this new setting.
Exactly. Joseph was wise. He knew they needed to integrate, but also preserve who they were.
As the famine gets worse, we see Egyptians selling their land, even themselves, to Pharaoh, just to get food. It's heartbreaking.
It really shows you even a powerful empire like Egypt, vulnerable to nature. And it creates this contrast. Egyptians struggling, Jacob's family, thriving in Goshen under Joseph's protection.
I bet that caused some tension, historically speaking. Foreigners in Egypt, not always a smooth relationship.
Oh, yeah. Potential for resentment, us versus them. Joseph had to walk a fine line. But you see, in the text, he's just compassionate. He's not using his position to, put his family above everyone else.
So how do we understand this? Divine providence, God's plan for Joseph and his family, but the Egyptians are suffering. Tough theological question.
Yeah. It's been debated for centuries. One way to think about it, God's plans, they don't always fit our human ideas of, fairness, justice. Sometimes suffering is part of something bigger. We don't have the full picture.
It reminds us, faith isn't always easy. Sometimes you have to wrestle with tough questions, embrace the mystery.
And those moments, when you grapple with the unknown, that can deepen your faith, your journey.
So we've reached the end of our deep dive, Genesis 5 and 46. What a story. Twists and turns, challenging questions, but ultimately hope. A family broken by betrayal, reunited by forgiveness and a belief in a plan bigger than themselves.
A story that still speaks to us thousands of years later. Family, forgiveness, and how resilient we can be, even when things are tough.
It encourages us. Look for the hope, even when it's dark. Trust that. Even in the chaos, there's a bigger story happening, one that leads to, redemption, restoration. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure.